A simple walk with my dog turned into a nightmare when three men mistook me for an easy target. What they didn't realize was that my dog, Baxter, wasn't just a pet. He was their worst nightmare. They thought they could get away, but the events that unfolded taught them a lesson they'll never forget. Let me start from the beginning. My name is Clara Jenkins. I'm 67 years old and have lived in this neighborhood long enough to sense when something feels off. It's usually a quiet area, tucked away from the chaos of the city. But sometimes the quiet can be deceiving. Every evening around 10 p.m., I take my dog Baxter out for a walk. It's a ritual I cherish. Just me, him, and the cool night air. Baxter isn't an ordinary dog. He's a German Shepherd, big enough to intimidate anyone unfamiliar with him, and clever enough to outsmart most people who are. What makes Baxter truly exceptional is his history. He's a retired police canine, having served for years before an injury ended his career. I was fortunate to adopt him, and he quickly became more than just my companion. He's my shadow, my guardian, and my unwavering protector. That night felt no different, until I turned the corner. Three men stood beneath a flickering streetlight, their silhouettes stretching ominously across the pavement. Something about their stance, the way they huddled together, sent a cold twist through my stomach. Baxter felt it too. His ears perked up and a low growl rumbled deep in his chest. One of the men noticed us and smirked, nudging his friend. "Hey, look at that," he called out, his tone dripping with mockery. "Grandma's out for a stroll with her big bad wolf." The other two laughed, their jeering voices cutting through the still night air. "Yeah, maybe she's training him to fetch her groceries," another chimed in, his laugh sharp and mean. Baxter stepped closer to me, his body taut like a coiled spring. His growl deepened, a clear and unmistakable warning. But the men didn't stop. They started toward us, their movements slow and deliberate, like predators closing in on prey. My heart pounded, and panic clawed at the edges of my resolve, but I shoved it down. I've lived long enough to know that fear is like blood in the water. It only emboldens sharks. The tallest of the three tilted his head, his smirk widening as he spoke. "Relax, lady," he said, his voice oozing false assurance. "Relax, lady," he said, holding out his hands in mock innocence. "We're just saying hello, no need for the guard dog act." But I wasn't fooled, and neither was Baxter. His growl sharpened into a bark, loud, commanding, and full of authority. It was as if he were daring them to take one more step. That's when it hit me. This wasn't harmless teasing. There was something darker in their eyes, something dangerous. I tightened my grip on Baxter's leash, my pulse pounding as I braced myself. Whatever these men had planned, they had no idea what they were about to face. One of them reached into his pocket and pulled out something metallic. The flickering streetlight caught it, making it gleam. My stomach dropped. It was sharp, something you'd find in a kitchen, but not for cooking. "Don't worry, Grandma," he said with a grin that made my skin crawl. "This'll be over before you even blink." My breath hitched, but I refused to let them see fear on my face. My legs, however, weren't as cooperative. They trembled despite my resolve. Still, I planted my feet, refusing to back down. Baxter, on the other hand, was as steady as ever. His growl deepened, so low it seemed to vibrate through the air. His fur bristled as he stepped forward, placing himself squarely between me and the men. The tallest one chuckled, nudging his friend. "What's this mutt gonna do, huh? Bark us to death?" Baxter barked sharply in response, the sound echoing through the empty street. It wasn't the bark of a frightened dog. It was a warning, a challenge. The shortest guy, who had been silent until now, shrugged nonchalantly. "Let's just show her who's in charge and get this over with." They thought it was a game. Baxter barked again, louder this time, and I could feel the power behind it. Baxter barked louder this time, taking another deliberate step forward. His movements were precise, almost calculated, as if he were sizing them up, deciding which one to neutralize first. "All right, Grandma," the tall one said, taking a step toward me. "Call off your dog, or—" He didn't get to finish. Baxter lunged forward, stopping just short of him. Teeth bared and growling like rolling thunder, he made his intentions clear. The man stumbled back, hands shooting up in a defensive gesture. "Wow, okay, chill out, mutt." But Baxter wasn't chilling out. He was locked in, every muscle coiled, ready to defend me at all costs. As for me, I tightened my grip on his leash, my voice calm and steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. "Baxter doesn't back down," I said, staring them down. "So unless you're eager to find out what happens next, I suggest you rethink your life choices." They didn't know who Baxter really was, but they were about to learn the hard way. The man holding the sharp object stepped closer, his grin replaced by a scowl. His glare was cold, menacing, as he raised the blade in the air, pointing it toward Baxter. "Let's see how tough your dog really is," he snarled, taking another step forward. Big mistake. Before the man could make a move, Baxter launched himself forward like a bolt of lightning. His jaws clamped onto the man's arm with surgical precision. This wasn't a wild attack. It was controlled, deliberate, and devastating. The kind of move that screamed, "I know exactly what I'm doing. I've been trained for this." The man's scream shattered the eerie silence of the street. "Get this crazy dog off me," he shouted, his voice cracking as he flailed, trying to shake Baxter loose. Spoiler alert, Baxter wasn't letting go. The other two men froze, their earlier bravado dissolving into wide-eyed panic. "What the heck is wrong with this dog?" one of them stammered, his voice a shaky mix of shock and disbelief. Still gripping the first man's arm, Baxter gave a sharp, calculated tug, yanking him off balance and sending him crashing to the ground. The metallic object slipped from his grasp, clattering onto the pavement, completely forgotten as he writhed, desperately trying to free himself. "Get him off me!" the man yelled again, his tone growing more frantic by the second. The tall one finally snapped out of his stupor, rushing forward. "We've got to take him down!" he shouted, grabbing a chunk of wood from the ground. The third guy hesitated, clearly second-guessing his choices. "This dog's not normal," he muttered, but he followed anyway, his steps reluctant. They came at us together, their movements clumsy and frantic. But Baxter didn't flinch. His body tensed, his focus razor-sharp. "Baxter, watch out!" I yelled, stepping back as the tall man swung the wooden piece. Baxter moved like lightning, dodging the swing effortlessly. With a calculated motion, he released the first man's arm and shifted his attention to the taller one. A deep, guttural growl rumbled from his chest as he lunged, barreling into the man like a linebacker delivering a perfect tackle. The tall man hit the ground with a loud thud, gasping for air as the impact knocked the wind out of him. As Baxter stood over the man, teeth bared, daring him to try anything else, the guy stuttered, Okay, I get it," holding his hands up in surrender. The third guy didn't even try to intervene. He stood frozen, wide-eyed, like he was reevaluating every life choice that had led him to this moment. "This isn't just some dog," he whispered, his voice trembling. And he was absolutely right. Baxter wasn't just some dog, he was a former police officer, trained to handle situations exactly like this. But the fight wasn't over. These guys weren't ready to back down yet, and Baxter wasn't done showing them what real strength looked like. It all happened fast. The other two snapped out of their hesitation and lunged at us. One of them grabbed a rusty metal pipe from the ground and swung it with all the force he could muster. "Stay back," I shouted, panic creeping into my voice. But Baxter was ready. He sidestepped the swing effortlessly, his movements sharp and precise. The man stumbled forward, thrown off balance by the weight of his own swing. Baxter wasted no time. He barked sharply, lunging just enough to make the man drop the pipe. "Are you kidding me?" the guy yelled, his voice cracking as he backed away, his confidence clearly shaken. Meanwhile, the third guy decided to try his luck. He thought he could be clever, sneaking up behind me. Big mistake. I felt a tug on my shoulder and spun around just in time to see him reaching for me. My heart pounded, but instead of freezing, I acted. Gripping my handbag tightly, I swung it with everything I had. The bag connected with a solid thunk against the side of his head. "Don't even think about it, buddy," I snapped, adrenaline surging through me. The man stumbled back, clutching his head. "What the heck, lady?" he shouted, looking more offended than hurt. While I dealt with him, Baxter was handling the guy with the pipe. After disarming him, Baxter lunged, knocking him flat on his back with a force that seemed to rattle the ground. Impossible for a dog, or so it seemed. The man let out a sharp yelp as he hit the pavement, with Baxter standing over him, teeth bared and a low growl rumbling deep in his throat. "Get it off me! Help me!" The man wailed, his tough guy act completely shattered. The third guy, still rubbing his head from my handbag's not-so-gentle impact, looked between me and Baxter, his face pale. "This is insane," he muttered, taking a step back. "Oh, you're just figuring that out now?" I shot back, gripping my bag like it was my weapon of choice. The guy pinned under Baxter squirmed helplessly, his voice rising in desperation. "Call it off, please. I'm done." But Baxter didn't move. His piercing eyes stayed locked on the man, sharp and unyielding, like a hawk watching its prey. He wasn't attacking, just making it crystal clear who was in charge. "Baxter, stay," I said firmly, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. The tension hung heavy in the air, thick enough to cut with a knife. The two remaining men exchanged nervous glances, their faces etched with regret as they silently questioned every choice that had led them to this moment. For a brief, fleeting second, everything was still. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. Chaos hit its boiling point. Baxter had one man pinned to the ground, another stumbling back from my handbag's reminder to stay away, and the third? Oh, he was done. Without a word, he turned and bolted like his shoes were on fire. For a split second, I thought about letting him go. But Baxter? Oh, no. Baxter wasn't about to let the fun end so easily. In a flash, he was off like a heat-seeking missile, locking onto his target with laser precision. The guy barely made it 10 steps before Baxter cut him off, planting himself squarely in his path like an immovable force of nature. The man froze, his hands shooting into the air as though he'd stumbled into a surprise police checkpoint. Okay, I give up," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear. "Just call off the dog, please." Baxter didn't flinch. He stood tall, his tail rigid and his entire body radiating authority. It wasn't just a stance, it was a statement. "You know my dog?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at the officer. The cop grinned, shaking his head in disbelief. "Oh yeah, Baxter and I go way back. Best canine partner this precinct ever had. Saved my hide more than once. Looks like he hasn't lost his touch." Baxter's tail wagged just a little more at the recognition, though his eyes stayed locked on the man beneath him, letting him know playtime was over. "Well, officer," I said, crossing my arms, "your old partner just saved me from these 3 geniuses who thought they could take on a grandma and her maniac dog." The man on the ground groaned again, his voice dripping with annoyance. "Can someone please get this psycho mutt off me?" The officer crouched down. Wes, meeting the guy's eyes with a smirk. "Oh, he's not a psycho. He's just doing his job. You, on the other hand, might want to rethink your life choices." Baxter stepped back at a command from the officer, his posture relaxed but still alert, ready to leap into action if needed. The officer nodded at me. "We'll take it from here, ma'am. But looks like you and Baxter didn't need much help." The other officers quickly moved in, cuffing the 3 men while reading them their rights. The one Baxter had pinned rubbed his arm, glaring at me like I was the problem. "Lady, you're crazy. Who keeps a dog like that just walking around?" I shot him a sweet smile. "Someone who's smart enough to know the world's full of idiots like you." Baxter let out a satisfied huff, sitting at my side like the good boy he was. The officer who knew him chuckled, giving Baxter a pat on the head. "Still got it, buddy." Then he turned to me, his tone softening. "You okay? That was pretty brave of you." I nodded, letting out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. "Thanks to Baxter. I don't know what would have happened if he wasn't here." The officer's smile widened. "Well, if you ask me, these guys picked the wrong grandma to mess with. You and Baxter make a pretty good team." As the patrol cars pulled away with the would-be attackers in the back, I glanced down at my loyal companion. "Good boy, Baxter," I said, scratching behind his ears. His tail wagged in response, and for the first time that night, I felt the tension ease. Walking back home under the now quiet streetlights, I smiled to myself. They say dogs are man's best friend, but Baxter? He's so much more than that. I knew it was going to be one of those days. By the time I stepped outside for my morning walk with Baxter, neighbors were waving, calling out, and some were even giving me the kind of look reserved for movie stars. I guess news traveled fast when a former K-9 officer and his grandma thwarted a group of would-be attackers. As we strolled through the neighborhood, people would stop and ask, "Is that the Baxter?" I'd smile and nod, giving him a pat on the head each time. Baxter, ever the professional, acted like he didn't care about the attention, just focused on sniffing everything in his path, as usual. But I knew he enjoyed the admiration. The local news stations had picked up the story, and by noon, it was being shared across social media like wildfire. The headline, "Hero Dog Saves Grandma from Attackers," was everywhere, with clips of Baxter from his K9 days flashing on the screen. I wasn't sure whether to laugh or groan at the sudden fame. It was strange, the way people's perception shifted when they realized you weren't just some average grandma walking your dog, but someone with a true partnership in crime fighting. Even though the attention was overwhelming, it didn't bother me much. After all, it wasn't the first time Baxter had saved the day. Back when he was in his prime, he had been a force to be reckoned with on the police force, and he hadn't lost his touch one bit. I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride every time I saw his name or face in the news. Later that day, a few officers from the precinct stopped by to check on us, grinning as they relived the events of the night before. "You and Baxter were a force to be reckoned with, ma'am," one of them said with a laugh. "I think you've got the whole neighborhood talking. Might need to start charging for autographs." I rolled my eyes playfully, but couldn't deny the satisfaction in the air. It was a reminder of what Baxter and I had been through together, not just the night before, but through years of service, side by side. He was more than just a dog. He was my partner, and that bond wasn't something that could be broken by a few headlines or curious glances. As the days went by, life slowly returned to normal, and the noise around the incident faded. But for me, it was a reminder that no matter how old I got, no matter how quiet my life might seem, I had one hell of a companion by my side. Baxter was more than just a hero to the community. He was my constant, my protector, and no headline could ever do justice to everything he meant to me. As we sat on the porch that evening, I looked down at him, his head resting on his paws, eyes half closed in contentment. "Good boy, Baxter," I whispered, scratching behind his ears. He huffed softly in response, his tail thumping gently against the floor. Maybe the world had caught a glimpse of who he really was, but to me, he'd always be the same, the dog who kept me safe, no matter what. And that was all that really mattered. I stopped in my tracks, staring at the plaque as the words sank in. For a moment, I was speechless. There, on a simple post, was a tribute to my dog, my protector, Baxter. I glanced down at him, and he looked up at me, his expression as calm as ever, as if he had known this was coming all along. "Well, buddy," I said softly, my voice thick with emotion, "I guess you've really made an impact, huh?" Baxter gave a soft huff, his tail wagging just enough to show he knew exactly what I was thinking. I couldn't help but laugh as I bent down to give him a quick scratch behind his ears. "You deserve this, and so much more." We stood there for a while, just taking in the moment. The street was quiet, but the plaque, glimmering in the afternoon sun, seemed to stand as a permanent reminder of everything Baxter had done, not just for me, but for the whole neighborhood. It felt surreal, like something out of a movie. But then again, Baxter was never just a regular dog. He had always been extraordinary, and even though the headlines had faded, the story of that night would be remembered for a long time, told and retold by anyone who had heard it. As we continued our walk, I couldn't help but smile. The world might have seen him as a hero, but to me, Baxter was simply the best companion I could have ever asked for. And I was lucky enough to have him by my side. "Let's go home, hero," I said, giving his leash a gentle tug. And with that, we turned back toward home, ready to enjoy a quiet evening together. As we made our way back home, Baxter by my side, the weight of the day settled into a quiet peace. The plaque behind us was a symbol, a reminder not only of his bravery, but of the unspoken bond we shared. It was a bond of trust, of silent understanding, that had seen us through more than just that one chaotic night. Looking around at the people who now waved at us, the children who ran up to pet Baxter, I realized something. His heroism wasn't just about fighting off those men. It was about the way he changed our neighborhood. He made people feel safer, more connected, and in return, they shared their gratitude with us, with him, with a kind of reverence that I'd never expected. But beyond all the fanfare, the reporters and the praise, what mattered most was what Baxter taught me about courage. Courage isn't just in moments of action or strength. It's in the quiet moments, the steady presence of someone or something by your side, helping you face the world without fear. It's knowing that no matter what happens, you don't have to face it alone. And those men who thought they could intimidate me? Well, they learned that lesson the hard way. Never underestimate the power of loyalty, love, and courage. Baxter didn't just protect me that night. He protected the truth that sometimes the right thing is the hardest thing to do, but it always brings justice in the end. That night, I learned that true heroes aren't always the ones with the most powerful weapons or the loudest voices. Sometimes they're the quiet ones, the steady ones, the ones who show up when it matters most. And sometimes those heroes are four-legged, with fur and a heart full of loyalty. As we walked on, I knew this story would live on, not because it was mine or Baxter's, but because it was a story everyone needed to hear. A story about standing up for what's right, about knowing that kindness and justice always prevail, no matter the odds. Baxter wasn't just a dog, he was a reminder of all that is good and right in the world, and I couldn't have been prouder of my brave companion. Stay kind, stay brave, and always remember, justice will win in the end.